All right, so your question of making 600 horsepower with the LS, that is a lot more doable. I don't remember if I said this in the first part where I was talking about making power with the M60, but at the end of the day, there is no replacement for displacement. I've talked about on one of my other channels, the Q-Tips channel, where I talk more so about like engines and whatnot. I've talked about specific output, which is the amount of horsepower that you make per liter. So typically for naturally aspirated cars, like the pinnacle of engineering for naturally aspirated cars is 100 horsepower per liter, right? So if you have a 4-liter engine, you know that you're doing pretty good if you are in a situation where you are making 400 horsepower out of that 4-liter engine. By increasing your displacement even more, you're going to make it exponentially easier to make more power. So if you were to go out and get a 6-liter or a 6.2 liter, getting 600 horsepower out of that engine will be difficult, but it's going to be a lot easier than getting 600 horsepower out of a 4-liter engine. And so that's one of the biggest advantages that the LS has just straight out of the box, is it has a lot of displacement. The other thing with the LS is that it's actually a very small engine. It has almost double the displacement as my stock engine, but the physical size of the engine is actually smaller than the dual overhead cam setup. And so when it comes to getting the engine in the engine bay, people who are channel members have already seen the engine in fact, I think by the time this comes out, I think everybody's seen the engine in the engine bay at this point. And then the LS is, depending on what transmission setup you go with, I should add that, depending on which transmission setup you go with, can weigh fairly similar to what your stock drivetrain weighed. And so you're not really like upsetting the chassis balance too much by going with an LS, and especially if you go with an aluminum block LS, because they're a lot lighter. They weigh like 94 pounds less than the equivalent iron block. The other thing too with the LS is that the aftermarket is just like far broader. And so if you want to make 600 horsepower with the LS, the question is more so, how do you want to make that 600 horsepower? Do you want to make it naturally aspirated? Yes, that is harder, but there are like defined ways to do that, right? Or you can supercharge it, or you can turbocharge it, and not everything has to be as expensive as things are on the M60 platform, because there's just so much variety. So like if you want to go with a supercharger, you can obviously go out and talk to the guys at Magnuson and get an off-the-shelf blower, or you can like go to the junkyard and buy a M90 supercharger from like a GTP or something like that, and there's adapters. Like there's all different types of ways to get forced induction into your LS. You can even use forward blowers, right? When it comes to turbocharging, you can go on Summit or anywhere and buy turbo headers. So it's way easier to get a forced inducted LS into your car than it would be to get a forced inducted M60 into your car, even though it's already there, right? I know it's kind of counterproductive. Now, in terms of doing the swap, that's going to be the hard part, man. Like at the end of the day, I see that you said that you don't really want to do it yourself. You want to bring it to a shop. Like what's going to be hard about that is like, that's how I ended up doing all of this, because no shop wanted to do it. Nobody wanted to work on my e34. Every shop that I talked to that specialized in LS swapping BMWs was like, you should just sell the thing. So if you're gonna LS swap an E34, like you should be ready to put in a lot of the legwork. I've had to like custom engineer a lot of the solutions in terms of how to get this engine into that car, right? And that's part of a big reason why I started this channel, was to kind of share that information with you guys to make your swap easier. And I know every time I talk about this, people are like, give us the engine mount. They're not done yet, you know, and like I'm working on a second revision. So that will be one thing that you will have as an advantage over me, is that you at some point will be able to buy engine mounts to put an LS directly into your car. But there's still like a million other things that stand in between you getting the car running versus just having the engine mounted in the car. And so if you're not mechanically inclined and you're not trying to do it yourself, if anybody is willing to take on that project, it's going to cost a lot of money, just an astronomical amount of money. And I don't know if it's really worth it to do that. And especially because it sounds like you're coming from a car that is a inline 6 car, if I remember the comment right. Yeah, so you have an inline 6 E34. So, and like I said, one video ago, I'm not sure at this point, because like I've made the videos months ago and I'm just posting them now. So I don't know what order they're coming out in. So like I said, a long time ago, if you have an inline 6 BMW, the layout of the engine bays are different between the V8 cars and the inline 6 cars. And so for example, like the brake booster is in a spot where it would touch the driver's side head on the V8 car, so they relocated it with a brake booster bracket. So, and there's just like a million things like that all over the engine bay. Could you LS swap a inline 6 E34? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just going to be a lot more work than starting with a car that's already a V8 car, which is why I made the recommendation in that video that if you have an inline 6 car, I probably would just stick with an inline 6. And I actually cut a whole section from that video talking about what engine I would recommend for you guys who are inline 6s. If you want a 4-cylinder, obviously the Honda K24 or the K20, especially the K20. I really like the K20. That is my big recommendation. If you want to go with a 6-cylinder, hey, how's it going? Now, if you want to go with an inline 6-cylinder, obviously the go-to option for every inline 6-cylinder swap is the 2JZ. I'm incredibly partial to the 1JZ. I really like the way they sound, and they rev higher, but they do make less power and they make less torque because they're a ½ liter smaller in displacement, but to me, they're cooler. It's not all about peak power for me. It's more about like the driving experience, but whatever. The other option, if you want to keep it in the BMW family, is obviously you could go with the M54 and then turbocharge that, or you could do the swap that I've kind of suggested a few people do and look into doing an N54 swap. That's going to be really difficult though, because like you're probably gonna have to switch it to either port injection and run it on a standalone, or you're gonna have to have a whole donor car and use the CAS module and all types of stuff. So, but any of those engines, like the 2J or the N54, either one of those engines will get you to your 500 horsepower goal as well. And you will even be able to do that with the Honda K20. But like I said, if you are looking at trying to get an LS into your E34 that is a inline 6-cylinder car, that's where you may run into trouble because of the layout of the engine bay. So hopefully that's helpful. Like I said in the previous video, right now I'm filming for my second channel, Aperture Media, where I kind of cover motorsports events and talk about why people should come down to races. I'm kind of on a break in between the IndyCar and the Indy Next race. And so hopefully I didn't ramble too much. Hopefully what I said makes sense. And if you guys like the idea of me just kind of like going through the comments, picking my favorite one and making a video directly telling you my thoughts on it, let me know. Like hit me with a like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff, and I will see you guys in the next one.